Hello everyone, I'm Mike Morgan, one of the woodshop safety monitors. I'm going to review with you the safety procedures we ask you to follow when you're operating the table saw. This is a saw-stop table saw, a very fine tool capable of making nice, straight, square cuts. Very smooth, almost finished quality, the sort of quality my grandma could only wish for back in her day. But nowadays we have it at our disposal. There are relatively few adjustments that regular users make on the table saw. They include the blade height, the blade angle, and the position of the fence or the miter gauge. So let's take a look at the adjustment of the blade height first, and I'll raise the guard. The blade height is adjusted with this large wheel here, and I'll unlock it and turn it, and you can see the blade rising and falling. The correct blade height is to be set by using your work as a guide. So set the blade height so that the bottom of the highest gullet, which is right here, is approximately in line with the top of the work. That's correct adjustment of the blade height. Doesn't have to be super precise, but this is close enough. Blade angle is at your option. It is adjusted by this large wheel on the side, and we can go anywhere from 0 degrees off the vertical all the way to 45 degrees in one direction. That's useful for bevel cuts. If you want to cut an angle edge on your piece, you adjust the blade angle. I'm not going to do that for this demonstration because we like to leave it at vertical all the time, and it's good courtesy on your part to return it to vertical after you're done if you've been making that adjustment. Now we need to talk about the two kinds of cuts that can be made on the table saw, and they are both described with respect to the direction of the grain in your wood. So in this particular piece, the grain is running in this direction. A cut parallel to the grain direction is called a rip cut, and a cut across the grain direction is called a cross cut. Cross cuts can be at 90 degrees or at any other angle you wish, but since we're still cutting across the grain, that's called a cross cut. So we'll talk about a rip cut first, which is done using the saw fence, this bar right here, which we will adjust with respect to its distance between the right side of the blade and the fence to give us the desired width of our final cut. I've returned the guard to its lowered position, and we ask you to always use the guard while you're making any of the cuts on the table saw, although there are a couple of exceptions to that I'll talk about later, when you may remove the guard for specific purposes. As I say, I'll come back to that in a moment. Let's apply power to the saw. In fact, whenever I'm making detailed adjustments to the saw beyond what I just showed you, I want to make sure that the machine is de-energized, as the engineers like to say, and the only way to confirm that is to be able to see the business end of the plug. So I can confirm that the saw has been de-energized. We're ready to energize it. So we plug it in to the only receptacle that takes the 4 prongs on the plug, which is this lower one labeled 208 volt 3-phase. Push it in and turn it slightly clockwise, and it's locked in place. Now we'll switch on the power to the machine, which is this switch here. We press up, and you can see the flashing red light there, which indicates that the system is initializing itself. Once it stops flashing and we get steady green, we are ready to go. I have just set the position of the fence by eye to match the width of the piece I finally wish to cut. Of course, for accurate work, I can either use the gauge here. It's set for just under 5.5 inches. Or to be really precise, I should raise the guard again and take a measurement right there. So we're ready to make our rip cut, but first we need to really think about where our hands are going to be. Before we begin our rip cut, we need to talk about a couple of safety issues that have to do with where you stand and where your hands are during the process. So you can see I'm standing to the left of the blade now. And as I feed the board into the saw, notice that I keep my left hand with the thumb locked against the front of the table. And my thumb should always be there to prevent my left hand from going any further forward than this. I don't want my hand to go like that because it gets too close to the blade. My right hand is pushing the stock into the saw. Push the stock all the way through until it clears the trailing edge of the blade, which is about here. This saw also has a very nice on-off safety switch. It's called a paddle switch. So to turn the motor on and run the blade, we pull the switch out. And I can turn it off with any part of my body, including my knee, my foot, anything that I can reach if I need to cut the power off to the blade quickly. Before we begin, we need to turn on the dust collection system for the entire shop, which is operated by pressing the green button here on the box, hold it in for 5 seconds, release, and the system will come on. So now we have good dust control for both the table saw and most of the other power tools in the shop. We're ready to begin our rip cut. So my left thumb is braced against the front edge of the table and is meant to keep my hand from moving any far forward than its current position. That way, that keeps my fingers out of harm's way. So I'm ready to start the saw. So you saw me reach over and push the piece of wood all the way through past the far end of the blade through what is called the kickback zone or the kickback pathway. And you want your body out of line with that throughout the cut. Just in case something gets thrown back this way, you don't want it hitting you. When you're cutting relatively narrow pieces such that you cannot keep your right hand more than 3 inches away from the blade, we'd like you to use a push stick like this. Place the push stick board with its hook, gripping the trailing edge of the work, and press it through that way. So notice I don't have to get my hands anywhere near as close to the blade as I did before, but I can still push the piece through. Often when we're doing rip cuts, we'll use what's referred to as a feather board, which is fastened in place with magnets locked down by those 2 screws, and it will hold the work against the fence, eliminating the need for me to have my left hand involved at all. So I can then feed the board through with my right, standing in the correct position, and my left hand is not in jeopardy. Very nice accessory. I encourage people to use it whenever they're doing rip cutting and the dimensions permit it. For the cross cut, we'll want to cut across the grain like this, and to do that we have to attach one accessory and remove 2 others. So I'll show you how to do that. The first is to move the fence completely out of the way. Do not use the fence for cross cutting. It can pose difficulties and make the situation somewhat dangerous. So move the fence all the way to the right. And the next thing we'll have to do is to install a miter gauge. This device here, which fits in the slot in the table and holds the board nice and square to the saw blade. Miter gauges are adjustable in the sense that the angle of the cut can be adjusted by you between 0 degrees away from square all the way to 45. So you can make miter cuts this way as well. We're going to leave it at 90 degrees. So I've got the left side of the arrow lined up with the left side of the blade so that the cut should come right through the middle of my arrow. Now I'm going to back up a little bit, holding the board in place next to the miter gauge so that the fence is all the way down. Good practice for when you're starting up, because you do not want to start the blade with the wood in contact with the teeth. Nasty things can occur if you let that happen. So now we're ready. You'll notice that with either of the cuts, the rip cut or the cross cut, I did not attempt to move the cutoff piece at all. I let it stay where it stopped during the cutting process. Do not try to push the off-cut piece away. Leave it sit until the saw blade has stopped, then pull it away. Same goes for both cross cut and rip cut. There's another accessory that we can use to do cross cuts, particularly for larger pieces of wood. It's referred to as a sled. you can see that it's got two rails mounted on the bottom, which are intended to fit into the two slots in the table. So I can place a piece to be cross-cut here and slide it through on the sled. Gives us a nice square arrangement so that the alignment is correct. Some of you are looking at this and saying, but wait a minute, the fence is in the way. And you're absolutely right. So in the case of using the sled, it's necessary to remove the blade guard. This is the one of only two circumstances where we will permit removal of the guard for special cuts. And so we'll demonstrate how to do that now. When you are removing the guard, you must de-energize the saw. So that involves turning the power off here. And because we don't trust electric power switches, we'll de-energize the tool at the same time. The reason I say that is I'm going to stick my fingers down here in the business area of this tool, and I don't want any opportunity for those sneaky little electrons to get in here and start turning the motor while my hands are in jeopardy. To remove the guard, we first pull out the insert. Reach down in here to find a dark gray colored lever that you pull up. There's the end of the lever. Now the entire guard system comes out. We'll place the lever back in the locked position. Reinstall the insert. And now the sled will fit on the saw. So I'll have my wood here, like this, hold it against the back edge of the sled, and it's a very easy process to make the cut. In this setup, you can see, I hope you can see, that the blade height is too low under this when we're using the sled, so I'm going to have to raise the blade until that condition I described earlier is met. That is, the bottom of the highest gullet is right at the top surface of the wood. So remember to reset the blade height when using the sled. Very nice accessory. We encourage people to use this for many of the crosscuts they'll want to do. As I mentioned earlier, do not start the saw motor when wood is in contact with the teeth. Likewise, do not attempt to remove anything from around the blade until the blade has stopped rotating completely. And that's not always easy to know about, so you need to wait a good long time for the blade to stop its rotation before you reach in, grab any of the pieces that are left near the blade. And finally, please remember to clean up after yourself, because after all, this is like the Boys and Girl Scouts. We'd like you to leave the place cleaner than when you found it. So I hope you enjoy using the table saw, but please remember to work with care and also to set a good example for anybody who's observing you.